Recently I've been involved in a number of conversations around the concept of disruption, and what I hear when I'm talking to people is a lot of myth. There's a couple of myths that I particularly would like to share with you today. The first myth that I'd like to share is that disruption is quick. That's a myth. Disruption is in fact typically quite slow. It takes 10 to 15 years for a disruption to really gain some momentum, and maybe 20 or 30 years for a disruption to change an industry. If we take Uber for example, Uber are around about a 10-year-old company now, and yes, Uber is a commonly known brand, and yes, they do have a lot of people driving for them. So there's a new business that has emerged and grown, but in terms of disrupting the existing taxi industry, I don't see that happening in the area of the world that I live in. There are still a large number of taxis out there. They're still doing a lot of work, and Uber is also working in that space. So I don't see them as having had a major foothold in the marketplace. Part of the reason for that is when a new business emerges with a different delivery model that's going to disrupt an industry, customers don't just swarm to the new business. They wait until the perceived quality of the new business matches their needs, and then they get on board with that particular disruptive company. So there'll still be a huge number of people out there who still take taxis or hire cars over booking a car through Uber. Another myth, another thing that occurs with disruption is that disruption tends to take out the low end of the marketplace, the low margin products, and they service the low end of the market by providing a different delivery channel, a low cost channel to service that market. Now the traditional players in that market may not be overly defensive around that business, because that business is their low margin business, it's not their high margin business. And if you take insurance, that yes, you can now buy, and have done for a number of years, been able to buy your insurance online, and you can process the entire transaction for your house and contents and your car insurance online without ever actually having to speak to somebody. They're taking the low end of the market. The house and content is a commodity item insurance. It's not you can't see significant difference between different insurers and their products. So it's more of a commodity. So they're taking a piece of a slice of that market. There's still a lot of people who insure their house and contents through brokers and direct with insurance companies. And in the insurance industry, people tend to change typically when they have a bad claims experience. That's when they tend to then move to a different company because they bought the right to make a claim when they need to, and if they had a bad experience, they will shift to another service provider because they expect that to be a positive, the process of making a claim, they expect that to be a positive experience. Another disruption that I'd like to share with you is the shift to digital cameras for taking photos. Prior to the digital cameras, if you want to take a photo, you had to go and buy film, and then you had to put it in your camera, take the photo, send your film off for processing and getting the prints printed. And then the digital camera came along, and once that had gained a large share in the marketplace, you saw that old film technology disappearing. So let's just have a look at the timeline for this disruption. Now the digital camera was invented in the 1970s, mid-1970s, by Kodak. And it wasn't until the mid-1990s that the digital camera had become a regular household item. Sure, there were early adopters before the mid-1990s, but by the mid-1990s it had become very common for people to have digital cameras. It then wasn't until 2005 that almost everybody had a digital camera instead of a film camera, and that the film industry had been completely disrupted. So that was an invention in mid-1970s, that took until 1995, that's 20 years, for that disruption to become common, and another 10 years to almost completely eliminate the film industry, film photography. So it's a 30-year period it took for a disruption to transform an industry. So when we talk about Uber, and it's around 10-year mark at the moment, it's really the next 10 to 20 years in the taxi, ride-sharing, service, limo type market, where we'll see how the ride-sharing systems like Uber transform that industry. It's too early to say what the long-term outcome will be, and how the taxi industry responds will really determine over the next 10 to 20 years what ride-sharing really looks like in the future. Thanks for listening.